You're listening to Founder Sessions, a podcast that helps people relate to the reality of startup life. My name is Carl Murray and I am a startup nerd. In each session, I will chat to entrepreneurs about their ideas, their stories, and the challenges they face throughout their journey. This session could not be possible without our good friends at Northstar Ventures. Northstar Ventures is a VC firm investing in innovative solutions to help solve the most pressing societal issues we have today. They are a pre-Series A investor with ticket sizes between £100,000 to £1 million. They focus on building long-term relationships with their portfolio clients to see them through to exit. To learn more about Northstar Ventures, check out the link in the description of this session.
So Sub10, we are a business that is heavily involved in designing and creating corporate digital learning. So we create experiences for businesses, essentially, which covers off all of their kind of learning requirements, essentially around compliance training. And I usually have to apologize for previously when I've said I am an instructional designer, I create training, because people usually kind of roll their eyes and think, oh, you're responsible for that, 1 hour, one-off course that I have to do once a year, whether it's health and safety training, whether it's my anti-bribery and corruption training, code of conduct training, but we're doing things really differently. So we are disrupting the market, as it were, by creating something very, very different. We did. So we wanted to get our message out there about what we're doing and why we're different. So I can go into a little bit more about that, because the launch was essentially catering around two things. We wanted to cover off a really important topic for us, which is diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's one of the topics we cover in our training. So we did invite along two really great speakers on that day. We've got Di Keller and we've got Deborah Gardner, who came along and spoke about the subject. So that was a really important piece for us to cover that. And we also then talked about our platform or our product and why it's so different. So it's really important, again, to get the right people along to the event. Doing it in the middle of the summer perhaps wasn't the best approach or idea. We had a lot of, people responding saying, I'm away, I'm on holiday. But we had a really nice turnout on the day. We had lots of people who I would say have supported us along the journey, along the last few years, who were able to turn up and give us some support. But it was also people who have reach and influence within the local area in particular. So we really wanted to engage with people who had access to wider networks. And that's really important, that people came along, they talked about what we were doing on social media. We had lots of photographs taken. We covered that off in our posts. We had an article in Northern Insight that went out afterwards. So we're trying to maximize the reach, obviously, with that event. The crux of what we spoke about at the event is really about why we're different and what we're up to. A lot of people say to me, why is it called Sub10? I have to say it's quite simple. Everything we do, everything we create is 10 minutes or less. So each of our learning units that we come up with are designed in a very modular way. So they're all 10 minutes or less. But what that allows us to do is to use the platform to deploy the content. So the platform will create a pathway of units that are unique for each learner. So each individual can go through and get their own experienced learning pathway, which is very suitable to themselves. So it's an individual kind of personalized pathway. Not only that, but it will deploy over time. So the units can be pushed out over the course of the year. So it can fit into your schedule. It can fit into what you're doing. So as a learner in an organization, it's a much more progressive way of learning. And it means that we can also identify where you're doing really well with certain units and where you might need a bit more support with other units. So it's a completely kind of unique approach to the way that people learn. And part of that launch event was really to get that message across and get that out there so that people understand why we're different and what we're offering as a company. Oh, it's a really good question. I think it's always been part of me, part of the anatomy, as it were. I think there are certain people in life who just have this drive. It's usually the people who don't sit well in an organization, can't take direction from someone above them, a little bit kind of like disruptive and want to do something a bit different. Maybe people who've got something to prove. I watched a documentary on Elon Musk the other night, and he came from a kind of a broken family, and he always felt he had to prove himself, and obviously he did over and over. But it's that drive and ambition, particularly when you get a frustration. So for me, my frustration, the problem that I wanted to fix was this one-off, one-size-fits-all, ineffective learning in corporate training. And my background, how I came into it, my background is very much, I trained as an archaeologist. And so I came through that area, which you kind of think, oh, that's a bit disjointed. How does that relate? When I was doing archaeology, I just loved the whole kind of piecing things together, the strategy, the evidence, working out what had happened, plotting things out and planning. And as an entrepreneur, I think you need all of those skills. I think you need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to see an overview of everything that's happening. That's really, really effective. So some of my skills from there did come into play. While I was doing archaeology, I had an interest in delivering seminars at university. So I really enjoyed the teaching aspect and getting information across to people in an engaging way, because I have to say a lot of my lecturers at uni weren't very engaging. And the ones who were really resonated and landed well. And I wanted to know, what was that secret formula? What was it that engaged you? It was usually the delivery. It was usually the style and approach, the engagement, the storytelling. All of that came into play. So I think slowly but surely I've been piecing all these bits together in my head as I've gone along on a journey where I then went into teaching, and I did primary school teaching for a while. And then from there, I kind of enjoyed that, but I have to say children aren't my forte. It's a real challenge to get them engaged. When you do, brilliant, but you have to use all sorts of blackmail techniques to try and get them to engage with you. So after teaching, I kind of moved into e-learning, and it was back in 2000 when I started off doing instructional design, but it was called script writing back then, or computer-based training, which is just not jazzy at all. So I was creating courses for the National Grid for Learning originally. Then I went to Digital Brain in Brighton, and I was doing some pieces for them, and kind of went to various different companies. Ended up at a company called EBC in Milton Keynes, and they were doing a lot of compliance-based training for various blue chip companies around the UK. I went through several journeys of working for different e-learning companies, but the frustration I found was this ineffective learning experience. Companies were paying a lot of money to get training that they never even measured. They didn't even know what the impact of success was of those training pieces. And I just felt such frustration as an instructional designer that I was never getting feedback. I was never being told how effective that piece of learning was. Did it land well? Was it well received? Did it have an impact for the business? I never got any feedback, and the learners didn't either. And the company didn't know how well it was performing, so they didn't know their return on investment. So while I was working for those other businesses, I felt this really strong frustration, and that was echoed and shared by Peter. So Peter Stevenson is the co-founder of Sub10, along with myself. And he was working sort of in parallel at that time. He was the studio director for Ubisoft. He was working with Caspian Learning. He had his hand in learning, but it was more around the games side. So he was exploring perhaps some of the more engaging material back then, but it was very clunky. It was very expensive. And we both came together and we sat and in a Costa in Berwick-upon-Tweed, kind of got the old napkin out and said, how could we do this better? Literally, what could we be doing to change the way that people learn? We were fed up and frustrated working for other businesses that we felt aren't doing it properly. And we mapped out this idea of creating things that were much more granular, that gave you much more control over the learner and the journey, so that you could create the shorter units, make it adaptive, tailor the experience, create a curriculum. And that was from my teaching background. Let's create a curriculum and allow people to get the learning that they need. So they go through the curriculum in the way that they need to. But we wanted to make this highly adaptive. And we knew that we needed a platform as well. So we needed a tech side. So we had it all mapped out on the back of this napkin. And we thought, this is what we need to do. And we weren't sure exactly how. This was 4 years ago. And we just thought, let's do it. Let's jump into this. I have to say, it's been a roller coaster ever since. But that's the background to kind of how Sub10 came about. That's a great question, because to be honest, we'd worked together previously. So I was a freelancer for a number of years before we started Sub 10, and I'd worked on some projects that Peter had coordinated. So he had a full-time role with the company, and I came in and I worked on some projects. And so we had a kind of a working relationship for probably a number of maybe two years before. And we knew that we got on well as a team in front of customers, enterprise level. You know, we could go in, we went into like Airbus and we did their product safety training, and we worked together really, really well together. So we knew that on a professional level, we had that nailed down. And we hadn't really sort of had any sort of other type of relationship, like, you know, friends or, you know, knew each other very well in any other capacity. And I think they become, as you are working so closely together, you kind of, you're answering each other's questions and you're finishing each other's sentences. It's really strange, but we almost have this sort of shared brain that we talk about. So we'll be in meetings and I know exactly what Peter's thinking. I know exactly what he's going to say. And I don't know if it's just spending far too much time with somebody, but you literally can second guess or judge if you have that close relationship. And I think that's what's worked really well is do you know, I have to say 99% of the time we're on the same page. We've never had that kind of clash where one person wants to do one thing and someone wants to do the total opposite. We seem to be very firmly aligned towards the same vision and goal. And I think that's important. If you have a co-founder, that regardless of how you get there, you both have the same goal in mind. And that's always been from the outset one of the things that we've shared. It is about being disruptive and changing the way that people learn. I think the other thing to add is it's really important that you are able to kind of play to each other's strengths. So I have to say, initially, we would go into meetings and we'd both want to tell our story and our version, and we'd both try to be, you know, quite vocal. So we'd both be trying to say the same thing at the same time. And we realized that wasn't effective. But we learned very quickly to kind of give each other a bit of space and give each other the floor when you needed to in a meeting or in a work situation where you knew that was, I know that's Peter's strength, so I'm going to sort of step back a little bit and let him talk. He'll do the same for me. So it's a little bit of courtesy, I think. But yeah, it works really well. So I think we do have, it's one thing though, if you are going into that sort of business relationship with someone, is to spend more time with them, I think, and suss out who they are. Yeah, no, it's a great point because as a business and as a smaller business, you know, we are the sum of the people. We are the sum of the parts. So it was really important for us right from the outset that basically everything we did was well structured, well put together. You know, even from the point of view, we got the best accountants, we got the best, and I mean the best as in we really appraised who they were, what they stood for, what their values were, did they align with ours? And it seems like a lot of work, but it did pay off in terms of getting the right people around us. So as a smaller business, when it was just myself and Peter to start with, you know, we shared 50-50. Peter would do all the production side, I'd do all the writing of the content. And we had some huge projects that landed within the first 6 months. We had a FTSE 100 wanting bespoke training courses. So we had a lot of work to do. We had to surround ourselves by the right people, the best people to give us that support. We had a friend of the family, I'll call him, Stu, who came along, who really supported us in terms of, he's now our chairman, that he really supported us in the beginning. And he's been there on that whole journey, which is brilliant to see, to have that support around you. Actually, Rick Charnley, he was one of the early people who came and supported us from Northstar. We had early conversations with him. Networking, we had a strong network locally. As you say, you know, Proto, where we were based, is a really good networking opportunity to have people around you. So when we were only two, we felt amplified by the fact we were in Proto. We felt we could have potential customers come to see us. We'd take them around the lab there. We'd show them all the equipment. We were looking more at the AI sort of area of learning initially. So we were able to look bigger than we were. There was like a hustle bustling office. There was, you know, people around. There was a reception area, and that worked really well. In terms of building the team, the first person we got in probably the most important person was a lady called Michelle who joined us, who took on a lot of responsibility around the production side and was able to help facilitate projects and work on that. But she was much more of a generalist. She helped support other tasks and kind of knew it was a smaller startup, so really got involved. We could rely and trust her to kind of run with things while we were doing other bits and pieces more at the business level. That's really important. The bright people have got to be the A-class people, the people who are professional, self-driven, self-motivated. You could trust them. They know where you're going with your goals and visions. So you've got to be able to share that effectively. But it's got to be the right type of person who's able to commit to what they're doing. So Michelle was a very important, valuable person who came in initially. When we grew the team from there, we were really looking at developing out the right areas of the business. So making sure that content and production had the right people, making sure that the tech side of the business, the technical capability was built out, because we have content and platform working together within our product. We're creating content, so we're creating those units around the various topics. We then needed to bring in a content team, so instructional designers and a learning director who were able to facilitate that part of the business and generate the right curriculums, generate the right content, work with the right subject matter experts. So we've got these three core areas of the business, I'd say. Kev Price heads up our technical side. He's our chief product officer, but he governs the technical capability. He's got great tech lead we've got in the business called Tim. We've got Joe, who's our back-end developer. They work really well together to create the platform functionality and to bring to life some of these, I'd have to say, very forward-thinking ideas that we have about the way that the platform can work. It is definitely about the content and the platform working together. So the people we've brought into place have to work across function. And so they're not always in silos. So it's really important that they connect and they collaborate. The production team that we've got will work on, so Daisy heads up our digital production team, and she's responsible for ensuring that the content we produce and the features we add on the platform are all the right ones, that they come at the right time, that the roadmap's ideal. So these people are absolutely pivotal to what we're doing. And just another shout out to a few people. We've got Jen, who's in our marketing area, who's working really hard on putting across the awareness of what we're doing as a business. So in social media, she's putting out amazing posts and things to generate that traction. And we also have Ellie, who's she started as a graphic designer, but I think that's really limiting her abilities. She's worked across brands, she's worked across the product, she's put courses together, she's built out the capability in that sense. And she's been quite influential in putting together some of the brand aspects and all of that. I have to say, I always compare it to like a mechanism that has to function and work together. And I don't want to say that anyone's a cog in a machine, because that's just downplaying who they are and what they are, but it has to run smoothly and work together. And everyone has to be in that sort of motion and moving towards that similar goal. And what we try and do is to put together like a 10,000 foot view call once a quarter, which actually allows everybody, because we're so busy off working on bits of content, working on bits of tech. And there's about 14 people that now work with Sub10. So it's about pulling them all in together on that 10,000 foot call, where we've got an opportunity to show and tell and say what we're proud of and what we've been working on, and to share like not only the commercial direction and how sales and marketing's going, but to look at every area of the business and see what are people working on, what are they really proud of, and share and show. And that works really, really effectively to pull everyone together. Do you know, Rick's always been a bit of a champion of what we're up to and what we're doing. And we spoke to him the first time maybe 3.5 years ago, so quite early into the journey and what we were up to. And we just wanted to share, you know, the projects we'd got, the work we'd won, where we were heading, where we were going. He supported us even from day one. He didn't kind of laugh and walk out the room at this, you know, new business that was trying to catch his eye. He gave us direction. He gave us pointers. He was willing to give us his time. And we kept that relationship. So for the first maybe year and a half of what we were doing, we saw him at events. We had him in our network. We knew he was watching what we were doing. We were sharing back what we were doing. So it was really good to establish that relationship with Northstar. So it didn't just feel like they just sort of appeared when things were getting good and decided to invest. They'd always been there. They'd always been supportive in the background. Beyond kind of just the investment, they have been really, really active in trying to support areas of our business. So, of course, now that they've invested, they are part of the board. So we have a monthly meeting. They know exactly what's going on within the business. They're really supportive at trying to add value and trying to offer opportunity. So when there's an event that's organised in the Northeast that Rick thinks we should be part of, he'll send us invites. I've been to all sorts of things where Rick's there, at sort of founders events, sales strategy events, where he gets people together and people that are on his portfolio as well. He'll get them in the room and he'll have training events and he'll do things which are really, really pivotal to us developing and growing as a business as well. So they're very hands-on. They don't just invest and then step back. He's part of that journey. He wants to know where we're going, where we're heading, where our pain points are. He's been on the phone, I know, to Peter at all times of the day. He's met up for coffees, more with Peter because he's based in the same city. I'm a bit further north in Edinburgh. But he's willing just to have a coffee and chat through, what's happening this week, what you up to, what you're doing. He's also willing to extend his network of contacts to us. So obviously what we're doing is something that could apply to any business in any industry. And Rick's got a lot of contacts and a lot of opportunities. So he will put us in touch with people to make those introductions so we can have those chats. So it really does go beyond what you probably imagine as a relationship with Northstar. We're just quite privileged to have that. So as a business, we have a real clear roadmap on what we want to do and what we want to achieve. As part of the investment that we took, we also did an Innovate UK grant, which was all about building out an element of innovation, hence the name. We actually won the grant on the second go. So I'd encourage people, you might get knocks and you might fall down, but you've got to stand up and you've got to get back. So we applied for the first round and we didn't get it. And we learned from the feedback that they gave us and we applied again. And that's something that's really important. You've got to pull your socks up and keep going and keep trying. And that Innovate grant has been so useful because that's part of this roadmap, part of the journey, and part of what we're trying to do is, as I've said before, be different to other providers. Other providers in our area will produce typically like a learning management system, a platform, and then content. It might be the same company producing the two, likely to be two different companies doing that, but they're meant to work together and they don't. They're very clunky because they're produced typically by two different companies. We're trying to create something that's symbiotic, that works together so that our learning methodology underpins both content and platform working together. The only way we can do this in an effective manner is to use AI, but to use AI in a form that is really, really going to work, because a lot of e-learning companies say, oh, we've got AI. Typically, it's just like a chatbot that filters what you need. It's just ask you at the beginning, what do you need? Oh, yeah, we've got AI-driven learning. What we're trying to do is pull all the information and data from our learners using these shorter units where we actually have one learning outcome assigned to each learning unit. So what we're able to do is really map very carefully and closely success. So if you imagine that you're going through some training, Carl, I'm going through some training, we're going to have different outcomes and outputs. We're going to go through different units. We're going to try and achieve different learning outcomes. And we want the platform to be able to recognize where you're possibly having an issue or a problem with a particular learning outcome. For example, I've seen a customer, I won't name names, GDPR, but I've seen a customer on the platform who struggled around diversity, equity, and inclusion around the language units. So we immediately knew that there was a bit of a gap there and we needed to plug that gap. So we've identified perhaps like an emerging risk within their organization. Perhaps they're not able to talk about diversity as they should be. So with the platform, we were able to identify that. And then we were able to use what we call variants of a unit, a different format of a unit. So when they've gone through perhaps like an animation, we've switched it for a podcast, but with the same learning outcome, or we've switched it with a piece of video or with a game. And then we keep doing that until we plug that knowledge gap, until we've understood that that person going through. So Carl, if you've gone through and you've struggled with a couple of units, later in your learning pathway, we'll interject the same learning outcome, but a different format. So it doesn't feel like it's the same thing for you. But as the platform is checking on your progress, it's identifying weakness and it's plugging weakness. It would also identify where you're doing well and may allow you to kind of skip and progress if you're already ticking that box and you can do that, you can move on. So this is about progressive learning. The Innovate grant is going to take us from a stage where at the moment we've got like a phase 1 version of our platform where we're using things like quizzes interjected between units to measure success and measure people who are struggling, and we can plug it in a more arbitrary manner. What we want the AI to do is to replicate a teacher in the classroom. So with a digital format, you don't have that teaching element. You rarely have that curriculum element. All you have is a one-off, one-size-fits-all course, check the box. We want the platform and the content to work together. We want the Sub10 product to be as effective as a teacher or a facilitator in a classroom who's able to assess and judge based on how you're performing and what data it's receiving from you to judge what you need to do next and create that unique pathway for you going through. So the journey for us and the roadmap, if you like, is really to keep going and build this out, build the innovation out, build up the data that we have on the platform and use it in the most effective way to create the right algorithms, look at machine learning, look at how we replicate success. So when people go through, we may have some sort of randomized activity initially to establish, did Carl like video better than podcast? Or was it just on that day he was having a bad day, or he was driving in the car and a video wasn't suitable? And we're going to work out all of that information and slowly but surely be learning what's the best approach for you and what's the best sequence of units for you. And we want it to be progressive over time. We don't want it just to be this one-off thing. We want the platform to be able to decide what you need in the future and to ensure that this is a continuous journey, because there's nothing worse than doing corporate training once and then getting the same training a couple of weeks later, or a year later you get exactly the same training. My sister, for example, has done 30 years of her job, and she's had the same fire safety training every year for 30 years. And yet she had a more effective solution. She could be a fire marshal by now. She could be the fire warden at her business, but they haven't ever allowed her to progress and evolve and establish her knowledge. They've almost patronized her and said, oh, you obviously, you've gone 12 months, you need to do the same thing again so we can check a compliance box. And that's really what we're trying to get away from and build out our business so that we can completely revolutionize the way that learning's done, which always sounds a bit scary, but it's just so ineffective at the moment that we want to completely change the way corporate training is delivered. Network as much as you can. I think the true value of your business is reflected by who you know initially. It's very difficult to sell stuff initially to kind of the whole world. You've got to start with recommendations. You've got to start with people who are around you. So my advice would be kind of network your socks off, establish that real strong social structure. You'll get support from people that you didn't expect. You know, you'll get recommendations from people who you won't expect to get that. You know, join every single networking opportunity you can, from accelerator groups to local companies who are looking to do the same thing as yourself. You know, be nosy, get in LinkedIn, establish your followers, build that up. That's almost like a social credit. It's almost like if you can establish that, that's going to add so much value for the future when you need something or you need to call upon somebody. But think of it as transactional as well. And I know that sounds horrible because these people that you're talking to is an emotional thing as well, but try and add value where you can. That's what you should lead with. See what you can do for other people. And I've always tried to do that. You know, if I've got a spare ticket for a CIPD event, I'll give it to an HR person that I know so that they can go along. There's so much things that are out there that you can do to try and ensure that you connect with people, you add value to their business, you like their posts, you comment on them, you share things, you're doing as much as you can to help support and promote other people, you're going to find that, in a year or 2 years' time, they may have moved on, they may have moved up, they might be able to do something back in return for you. And it's just about ensuring that you've got that really strong network, and never underestimate the kind of the power that can have. Yeah, of course. I'm on LinkedIn, so certainly just search for Angela Ross Subaten. We also have our website, which is www.sub-1010.co.uk. You can go there, you can access our platform from there as well. So if you want to go on to the product and have a look at content, we have a lot of free material on there as well. So you just sign up and you can get, for example, we have an amazing a whole set of units on safeguarding that we did with 2 local businesses, with Mesmer and with Psychological, which is an incredible piece, which for anybody, it's all open, it's all free, you can go through, and it just reminds you of looking out for other people in a corporate sense, in a business world. So it's for adults as well as people who look after kids and children as well in an educational space. So it's for everybody, really. And especially coming out of the pandemic, I think it's really important that people have a look at that and spot signs of safeguarding issues. So where you can support and help people, there's advice and information in there about what you can do. Should you see someone who's maybe not acting in the way that they used to, maybe there's something out of sorts, and maybe you can support and help them. So that's a really, really good thing to do, is to go on and do a safeguarding training. It is a passion. You have to see it as a passion. You have to see it as, I want to change the world and I truly believe I can. And if you've got that mentality and approach, whatever you're doing, whatever product it is, whatever service you're providing, whatever business you're setting up, it is that drive that you need, because that will get you through the highs and the lows that you definitely experience.